All right, welcome back, everyone. We are are starting a little bit of something new mixed into our schedule. I hope you all saw the new reading schedule that I think I tried to include everyone in that email. I sometimes forget. Anyway, so we are going to talk about our story for today, but I'm going to try to reserve like 10 or 15 minutes at the end to discuss the Psalms a little bit. I am not an expert of the Psalms. I very much stick to the story bits of the Bible much more than I have delved into the Psalms. So I'm putting it out there. The Psalms are out of my realm of expertise, but they are beautiful and poetic, and they connect in somewhat to the story. And I chose the ones specifically that are purportedly written by David and trying to get the themes to match, because historically some of these Psalms are said to be related to certain themes. We have already passed, it turns out we could have been doing this for the whole book. There are some Psalms that when I was trying to look up a list of matching scriptures, we've already passed a few of them, but that's okay. We're picking it up now.
Okay.
But with that in mind, let's jump into the story for today. So we've been kind of talking about David on the run from King Saul. King Saul is actively hunting David, but having a mixed time about this. And today we are picking up that story again. We left off last time that Saul was in hot pursuit of David. Morning, Helen.
Good morning. Finally made it. I had trouble with my technology this morning.
I give up.
No worries. But at the end of last week, we saw that Saul was hot on David's tail and like about to catch him when he got word that the Philistines were attacking, and he's like, oh, I should probably go deal with the Philistines. So today, what happens is the fight with the Philistines wraps up and Saul picks up the pursuit of David once again. The location that we are talking about, we looked at briefly last time. This is one of the places that I had pictures of. It's called En Gedi. You can go there today. It is a lovely oasis right next to the Dead Sea, south of Jerusalem. Oh, here we go. Let's see. I'm going to show you a picture just once again. This is actually my picture. Whoa, nope, go back. There we go. So this is En Gedi. This is one that I took when I visited. You can see it's lush, it's green, there's water, but this is a waterfall. There's like a few different stages to the waterfall that comes like out of the desert. There's a lot of little nooks and crannies to hiding, and that is a major part of today, that there's a nook that David's hiding in, and it turns out the cave's a bit deeper than King Saul thinks it's going to be. So what do you all take? I want to get some initial reactions from this story, because this is one of the more famous episodes with David and King Saul. Is David sparing Saul's life despite the fact that King Saul is actively trying to kill David, and David passes up a chance to kill King Saul? So what are your all's initial reactions?
Well, it would have been it would have been a great accident if he had killed him. I mean, it just would have screwed up the narrative unbelievably.
So he's a better guy than Saul, clearly.
So in one point, on one part of it, this makes a great story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Sue, from what you're saying, it makes David look really good.
Mm-hmm.
That it looks like he's much more moral, much kinder, much more loyal and upstanding. Other thoughts on this?
Well, it does have a visual impact to it. The corner of the robe, the scrap of fabric, or in this case, it's like a little cut off section of the fabric. It makes a good image. but it almost seems to me that the real part of the story is David's long talk about how he was led not to kill him, and Saul says, "Oh, you're such a good man." It's kind of a hagiographic kind of look at David. It was so wonderful that you didn't kill me. And I think you will be a wonderful king, and everything is going to be fine.
So what you're making me think, Gretchen, is that if we set this in like a movie today,
Yeah.
the tension in this scene would have been entirely in the cave. You could see like David creeping up and like kicking rock, and Saul like stuttering and like looking and like hiding, and then like trying to cut the cloak, and then him move, and it, like that's where all the tension would be in the cutting cloak process. But the story glazes over. There's actually really interesting tension and visual for monologues. We have 2 monologues. That is the majority of this passage. So I think that is always good to pull out, that the writers are focused not on what David did, but the speeches afterwards.
You know, I think the fact that David made such a quick decision not to kill Saul and to just cut off a piece of his robe shows that real deep character and confidence in himself, that he didn't have to take advantage of this situation.
I like that. It shows a sense of confidence and self-assuredness, that he's not willing to take the shortcut.
Right.
I mean, technically anyway.
But he scared Saul because he cut the hem off. That was pretty scary. I thought he was going to kill Saul.
Yeah, but David's men were, pushing him to, here he is, kill him.
Yeah.
And this is David's proof that he was there with Saul. So he has that.
Right, because David could have, without that piece of evidence of, look, I have a piece of your clothing here, it could have just been David's like, oh, I hid in the cave. And you just didn't find me, and oh, here I am, hide and seek. Like, the proximity is a key factor, that he proved that he had the proximity. He had the advantage.
Right.
There seemed to be a little bit of tension in the beginning of the story. You have David hiding in this cave and Saul coming into it, and you don't know what's going to happen. It's sort of like, ooh, this is kind of exciting. Well, maybe he'll find David. Maybe he'll end up killing him, but he didn't.
Yeah. So let's talk about the language, like actually dive into the verses and the language, because there's a lot of really interesting things going on in this scripture. So once again, verse 1, we see that Saul is returning from fighting the Philistines. Evidently, it didn't go badly. He gets word that David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi, and so he takes 1,000 men and moves south. And so they're looking in this place that's also called the direction of rocks of the wild goats. There's a lot of goats in this area because there's vegetation and water. You'll see this to this day. And so there's also the additional hilarity. Like, some of this is meant to be funny. So Saul is avidly looking for David. And he accidentally finds David. He doesn't actually find. He comes upon the hiding spot when he finds a spot to relieve himself. Which is just ironic in some ways. So he, like King Saul, is like having to like go away with his kingly robes and find a place to relieve himself. And that's when David's men are like elbowing each other, going like, hey, this is our chance. And they said, Here is the day which the Lord said to you, I will give you your enemies into your hands, and you shall do to him as seems good to you. So they're saying that this is God orchestrating this situation. Here's the king, not like looking for a fight, but literally pants down in a cave in front of David, and David and the men are like in the shadows, like watching the king in the most vulnerable state he can be in. But they said, so they have this quote, I will give you your enemies into your hands. This is the first time this comes up. This hasn't really been stated before. This may just be something that was circulating, something that was put into the text. At any rate, it says, you shall do to him as seems good to you. And the men seem to think that what seems good to them is kill him. So what do you think about this orchestration? Is this just cosmic irony? Is God handing Saul to David? Is this a test? Like, what do you think of this whole ironic setup here?
Yeah.
Barry, you seem to have a thought.
Well, one thing I thought of when this started was that Saul goes down there with 1,000 men, which is, a bigger number than, there were 600, with David here and a few hundred over here. He goes down there with 1,000 men. So it's obvious he's gone down there with the intent of killing David. I mean, at least at the beginning, there isn't any question about what Saul is up to. Then to get caught with his pants down is a little bit ironic, yes.
Literally.
Right.
So the cave he goes into to relieve himself is the cave where David is.
Yeah.
Really funny.
Yeah.
And it's meant to be funny. That like you have 1,000 men combing this area, and wow, there's a lot of nooks and crannies. It's not that big. So you have 1,000 men looking for David, and it just happens to be the cave that the king decides to relieve himself in.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's 3,000 men.
Yes, yeah.
It's a bunch.
3,000. I'm sorry, I misread that. You're right. Yes, 3,000 men. That's a lot of people.
Or to chase one man who doesn't have access to having nearly that many.
He's got about 600 in.
Uh-huh. So David doesn't tell his men what he is going to do at first. His men are just saying, hey, here's your chance. Take it. And so David goes forward, cuts the hem of the robe. I want to know what David did, because if you've ever cut fabric, like it's easy with scissors, but if it's a knife, cutting fabric with knives is not easy. And so I'm just, there's part of me is like how, I want to know how he did this. Because theoretically the king has really nice fabric, which would make it even harder to cut. I don't know how this works. Anyway, so David somehow took a piece of his robe, but notably did that while Saul is occupied, but also so stealthily that the man didn't even know his clothing is being manipulated. Like the amount of stealth that you would need to use some kind of knife or a dagger to take a piece of fabric and the person not know is actually very impressive.
And hard to believe.
And hard to believe. At any rate, yeah.
I picture it that the fabric was on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which would help with a sharp knife.
To just like hack at it.
Yeah, hold it tight and just rip. And he didn't have to take that much.
Nope.
All he had to do is have something to prove that this all has happened. And
So, right, or it doesn't say that David was tempted to kill him. It literally just says, like, David went forward, cut a piece of his cloak. But then the next verse it says, afterward, David was stricken to the heart because he had cut off the corner of Saul's cloak. So he evidently was very moved by this, moved by his own action even, and he came back and basically chided his men of like, why'd you tell me to kill him? And the Lord forbid that I do such a thing to my Lord. The Lord's anointed, to raise my hand against him, for he is the Lord's anointed. Now, this is where language is important. I know sometimes it's confusing when you have multiple lords. Remember I hope it's distinguishable when the lowercase lord is talking about Saul and uppercase lord is talking about God. But there is one word in particular I thought you all would find interesting, but I also wanted to share a tool with you all. If ever you find a word in scripture and it's like making you wonder, what does this actually say in the original language? So this is a website called Blue Letter Bible, which I have a computer program that does something similar, but this is the one that I use on the go when I really want to look up, or like in a pinch when I just need to understand one word. So you will see the English. This is generally in English syntax, so you're not going to get the Hebrew syntax, but you get the Hebrew word, the kind of the transliteration of it. There's a cataloging system that you all don't need to know of, and then the root word. Anyways, why this is important is because it's talking about the Lord, the anointed. This word we talked about on Sunday. Was it this Sunday? Yes. You see Messiah. What does that sound like?
Messiah.
Exactly. That's the word that we say as Messiah. It is this is the Hebrew word for it. Mishah means to pour oil on someone or like rub oil on them. That's where at the beginning of Saul's reign, we saw that Samuel poured a bunch of really nice smelling oil on his head to denote he was king. He did it actually a few times, and David has also had oil poured on his head at this point. But I just want to point out sometimes the different ways that this word is used, because Christians have kind of taken this word and ran with it in a very different direction. But what David is saying is Saul is the Lord's Messiah, which is an interesting, it is not meant to be Savior, Son of God, Messiah, but it is meant to be this very elevated status of this is the Lord's anointed, and that should be taken seriously.
Do you think there's any implication that that David really had decided to go kill him, and
I feel like you're thinking, you have a train of thought here.
You're like, here we have, then David went and instead of, he'd just been told to give, that the enemy would be into his hand. And at the last minute, he said, well, maybe I shouldn't kill him, maybe just take a little bit of the robe. I've always thought of this before as Saul taking a nap, but he wasn't taking a nap. He was in a position of vulnerability and unsteadiness if we see him, if he's really spending time relieving himself in a big way, which, he's a man. So, but there's a kind of a thought like, did David have, and here when he goes in afterwards and he was stricken to heart, does he realize how close he had come to killing Saul?
Mhm.
And at the last minute, I guess I won't. I don't know.
It feels that way. I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are truly angry and upset, feel betrayed, killing the king with his pants down, there is few things more humiliating that David could do
Mhm.
than to do that and then be like, okay, here's your king, come get him. Like that would be how that scene would play out in the other way, on the other, if David had not done this. And so I do think, Gretchen, thank you for that perspective, because yeah, the inner turmoil, like fighting, your men are actively encouraging you to do something, and it could be advantageous to you, and you choose not to. Does it feel good? Does it feel frustrating? Do you feel let down when you don't do the big thing and you take the humbler route?
Yeah.
It might feel good to David, but it sure didn't feel very good to his followers. To the military, this would not make any sense at all, but to the
It isn't typical.
logically inclined, it means a great deal.
We don't read many stories of people deciding not to kill somebody.
Mhm.
But
So-
these men had sacrificed a lot, put themselves in danger. They're helping David, and they have been sacrificing a lot in
Mhm.
order to do that.
Mhm.
And then David says, no, no, we're not going to do it.
Mhm.
I still think a very valuable part of this is time. He didn't have 20 minutes to think it over. He had to react. So it was kind of, I feel, part of his nature to go easy and think about the ramifications really quick, because he didn't have a lot of time to make that decision.
Yeah, that's true.
Mhm.
That's right.
Mhm. The psalm talks about feeling guilty.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of guilt statements in there, and it
Yeah.
seems like it's related to what happened, because he was feeling guilty about even thinking of killing Saul.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a situation I wouldn't doubt that David would feel guilty either way, because
Yeah.
either he would be guilty of murder, but as you
Yeah.
were pointing out,
Mhm.
this maintains this group of people's feeling of being in jeopardy. That by not doing this, like Saul has has these lovely words, but I think, as you all can probably guess, he's going to turn around and try to kill them again. Like,
Mhm.
they are not safe yet. And so David chose his morals over his men's safety.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah.
So while I agree, I didn't catch who made the comment. Sorry, someone walked in my office. I didn't catch who said it, but the comment that, well, we don't know many people who are like on the fence about whether or not to murder someone. The corollary that I will draw maybe is not murder, but have you ever been in a place where you've written an angry email, and after writing it, you're like, never mind, delete, and you delete it? Or you think of the conversation you want to have, and you have your phone and you're about to dial the number of the person that you really want to just rip someone a new one, and you decide not to. Or there's a Facebook, you all may not be of this generation, but I know people talk about, like, you type out that angry response in the comment section, and then you go, okay, never mind. Any of those situations where you feel so ramped up, and then in the moments that it becomes irreversible, you actually step back.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, if this is striking a nerve, what was? Tell me some stories. Like what are some situations where you stepped back and where you're like, never mind, I'm not going to take that step, even if it's just angry words. How did it feel when you didn't say the angry thing?
It feels good. You lighten your load. Like
Mhm.
move
Yeah,
on.
sure, go for it.
Just move on. And
Mhm.
I think it for a few times that I've recalled, it seemed to me is kind of a relief. You said it, typed it out, whatever, got it out of your system. Now don't continue to stir up somebody else. Just
Mhm.
So it's still therapeutic to write it out,
Yeah.
but just don't ever send it.
right.
Okay.
Well, don't write it out on a computer. The conventional wisdom has always been to write it down on a
It's
piece of
public
paper
knowledge.
Mhm.
and then rip up the paper.
There are different ideas about that, though. That you, on one hand, write it out and then, and it's out, it's done. The other one is that by writing it out, you actually continue to inflame it within yourself so that the writing can be damaging.
It can be, yeah.
I don't know. It's
Until you stop and read it again. And then you go, whoa.
yeah.
I was thinking,
Slows you down. Writing slows you down a little bit.
Mm.
I was thinking too of drivers who have a lot of road rage. Somebody cuts them off and they're screaming and yelling at them, just reflexly, even though they can't. So it's a safe thing to do. Nobody's going to hear them except the passengers, maybe. But it's that sort of thing of expulsive anger coming out.
Mhm.
I think that's I think that I feel like it's kind of a really strong lesson in this. I think a person needs to have a very strong, and I'm not saying I do, but other people, you have to have a very strong sense of whose you are and who you are to stop.
But yes, yes.
The people who, and I keep reflecting on people that I see that have nothing, don't have that internal, like, well, stop, you've said enough, or just listen. It's a pretty hard thing to learn and to hold on to.
Mhm. Yeah. Because
Sometimes if you explain your anger to the other person, though, it gives a chance for dialogue. Now, of course, this is in the case of killing the other person, so you wouldn't have a chance for dialogue. But if it was just the anger, and sometimes anger really means I hurt. I want you to know this. And I don't know that I would delete unless I'd said something really, I mean, I don't think I would have said something really horrible, but I certainly would express myself, I think.
Mhm.
And let it go.
Yeah. I mean, they do. I've heard people or psychologists say that anger is a secondary emotion, that it's normally there's something at the root of it that expresses itself as anger.
Mhm.
That it's normally I hurt, I'm afraid, I'm scared. Those tend to be the base emotions that then come out of us as anger.
Mhm.
Because anger is easier to deal with than I am scared. Or I am in pain. Or that's another one I see a lot in people when people are lashing out and you realize it has nothing to do with you and you realize they're expressing I'm in pain, make it stop. And they don't know how to get that need met. And so it comes out with fangs and pain. But I know from my experience, there's a few times if I get an email that just hits my button, I know I come off as very happy and bubbly. I do have an angry side. I just try to make sure that it's dealt with before I'm interacting with people. And I am one that I will rage type something out because I need to just blow off the steam. And then I come back and write my actual response to things. And I've had to do this many a times where someone just hits a button and I'm like, whoa, and I really just want to go like full Hulk mode and smashy, smashy, smash, but that also breaks the relationship. And so, Helen, I like what you said, that anger in itself is not necessarily bad if it's dealt with correctly. So, like, sometimes you do need to express that, hey, what you did was not okay. What you were doing is not okay. Hey, this is not going to work. But coming at it with full-blown emotion is not always helpful. And so that's where I see it as kind of like cutting off the corner. I'm going to write the big angry email, and then I'm going to cut off a corner and just say the like smaller version that expresses in a way that promotes dialogue rather than defensiveness. So. But I have to say, I will fully admit, there is times where I really wish I didn't have to be the David in the story. There are some times that I really, really wish I could send that really, really angry email. I won't, because I don't want to deal with the ramifications of a very angry email like that. But there's some part of me that, like, there is a part where it's not satisfying. It is much more satisfying to want to give in to the anger. And so I feel like I bring that up to say that David's little rant towards his men seems to me like he's trying to convince himself. Like, he's also a little bit disappointed that he knows he chose a better option, but it's not satisfying like taking him out would have been. So any other thoughts on this? Yeah, Gary?
I didn't get that feeling at all. Maybe I missed
it. Okay, that's fair.
I thought it was more the godly connection between he and Saul, the common thread that they had, where there was when it got right down to kill or not kill, there was a respect for this other individual.
Yeah. So. And I think that respect very much comes out in David's monologue that comes directly afterwards. So Saul leaves the cave, and then before he's too far away, David pops out and says, hey, looky here, you found me. But his words are very tender in actuality. We see that he is refuting the fact that anyone would say that he is trying to do Saul harm. But in verse 11, he calls him my father. This is like, he is expressing the familial relationship. Like, we've already discussed that Saul's family have kind of semi-adopted David. He is his father-in-law, but he has originally a very like father-son relationship as he was brought into the royal family. And he's evoking that again, like, my father, see the corner of your cloak in my hand. It's like, look at what I like this is what I did. And frankly, that would be terrifying if you were just relieving yourself and then someone waved around a piece of your clothing saying you didn't notice me. I would but in verse 12, David once again is evoking the Lord being judge and kind of setting up the situation of like, I am not like, David doesn't even want to arbiter the situation, but like, out of wicked comes wicked. Look at what I've done. God will judge me if I did the right thing, essentially. So what do you think of, or any thoughts on this long monologue of David's where he's trying to say like, hey, I'm not doing you harm? Yeah, Larry?
Well, he certainly let Saul know, look, I was there. Not only was I was there with a knife. And instead of cutting you up, I cut a piece off your cloak, you know. So he's letting Saul know in no uncertain terms that he had spared his life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's letting God know too. I mean, he's saying he wants to get credit for,
Yes.
just in case you didn't notice, this is what I did.
And he puts that very well. He says, and some told me to kill you, but I spared you. He's really telling Saul, this is what happened, and I spared you.
Mm-hmm.
You see, my father.
So then Saul responds in something that sounds uncharacteristic of Saul at this point, where he turns around to like, is that you, my son David? And once again, returning the tenderness. Like we're not getting angry, insane Saul. And Saul is very willing to say like, oh, you're so much better than me. I'm literally trying to kill you and you spare me. And in verse 20, we see him say, now I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hands, which is a lovely sentiment.
And in some ways, those seem like almost planted. I mean, the whole thing, I mean, is but especially that Saul thing, I mean, that's for good PR purposes. Look at Saul and I were just so close. I'm kind of.
So you think David's PR team had a go at this story to make it look nice?
Yeah.
Especially since their last encounter, Saul threw a spear at him.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got two PR teams. You got the Saul PR team. It wasn't all that bad a guy. He was nice to David there, and he knew that his time was up as king. He was being reasonable. I don't know.
So you got where I was gonna go anyway, so let's go down this route. Why does this make David look so good? Why? Like, because the story existed. Like, this is one of those that, for reasons we'll get to later on, there's another version of the story that's included. So we know this happened, but this feels very manufactured. And so why does David's PR team, the scribes, really want to highlight the fact of the closeness between these two and the fact that David spared King Saul? Why does this make King David look good?
According to that book that I read, that is the helper to figure out what's going on in the story.
Yeah.
David was pretty wild. He was out there doing all kinds of things with his team of people, and hitting on the Philistines and doing all kinds of things on his own. And then he was pretty crazy. And then now he's to become the king. They want him to look good. They want him, here he is looking like this kind, wonderful, thoughtful person. They don't want this wild man anymore.
So it's showing David being a measured, thoughtful person, rather than very much the wild child. And he was. Is there another angle that you could take of why this makes David look good?
I keep thinking of Jonathan, who is the rightful heir to the throne. And, you know, Saul is kind of handing it over to David. There has to be some feelings about that. And
I mean, so if you remember from a few times ago, Jonathan has already pledged his fealty to David. Jonathan knows David's going to be king. he is willing to let it go. So Jonathan got there before the King Saul did. But it still is a major turn in personality that Saul would acknowledge that David is the new heir to the kingdom.
Yes. But he also says, swear to me, therefore, that the Lord will not cut off my offspring after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house. In other words, I want, the name of Saul to stay out there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want you to kill off Jonathan. And
mm-hmm. So if Saul wants David to swear that, that means there's a reason to swear that.
mm-hmm.
Why would one king want to kill off the entire previous royal family?
That's what you do.
Yeah, you have a dissenting faction. If there's an heir of Saul, anytime anyone got mad at David, you could say, well, David's not the rightful king. Let's prop up this little boy. We're going to groom him to take over and usurp David. So, Saul is saying, protect my family. So why would the text here say that David promised not to kill Saul's entire family? Why does that make David look good? Because it does.
Yeah.
Because it's contrary to the way most kings operate, or dictators, or otherwise people in power.
And usually what they do is they kill everybody, including their livestock. So this is very different.
But this is going to come back. We're going to hear this again, that when David does remember these words of Saul and Jonathan, about Jonathan. Anyway.
Yeah.
So is it important because it's making the power of words stronger than the power of the sword? It's saying that a promise, it's a new way of being, of create. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just wondering.
I love your interpretation if the only thing is I already know where the story is going and it doesn't pan out that way.
I can live in hope.
Here's my take on Saul's propaganda sounding speech. You have a few things going on. Number one, by the closeness of David and Saul, by David sparing Saul, why this makes David look so good is it makes David look like he is not power hungry. And one of the best things you could have as a king is a king that doesn't actually want to be king. I didn't want this role. Oh, no, look, I didn't try to take the king. Because David does look like an upstart usurper. And if you are the one who took the throne from someone else, the best thing you can have is look, I had a chance to take it before and I didn't. I don't actually want this role. It's that mock humility. And David's story loves to play up this mock humility of, look, I could have been the king sooner, but I had so much respect for the other king. And it's a way to win over the people who liked Saul. It's trying to get those people on board of, look, I was not treasonous. You should swear your loyalty to me because, look, I had a chance to be treasonous and I didn't. So that makes David look good. And then on the other side, promising not to kill Saul and his family, because as you said, that's what kings do. You eliminate the competition. You leave no heirs to potentially do to you what you did to them. So, spoiler alert, Saul and his entire family die. So they do die. There is Saul's name is not eliminated from the record, but Saul's lineage does die out. But it's important that David doesn't do it. because then it's Saul's punishment. It's not David being a ruthless king. And that is really important for David's self-image. That he's like, I did not kill the royal family. I swore to protect the royal family. It's not my fault that the royal family's dead and I have to be king. I didn't want to be king. I protected the royal family. I promised to protect the royal family, but now they're all dead. So this story is actually doing a lot of heavy lifting of David's PR campaign of trying to make him look real good. From Helen, as you said, this wild child, this party boy, this mercenary soldier who fights for the other side. They need to rehabilitate his image. So, any thoughts about this section? In the words of the story, they end on good terms, but they don't reunite. That's probably because this conversation, my guess is, went very differently than it is written that it went. We can imagine what that conversation would actually sound like, but there is good evidence that the story in some way did happen. So, any thoughts on this? All right, let's turn quickly.
I'm wondering, before we move on, I don't know if he had chance to think about this, but I wonder if him being reluctant to kill Saul had something to do with his relationship with Saul's son.
I mean, yes. It's also, yeah, I mean, David was close with the entire family. Saul was a mentor to him. His best friend is Saul's son. Like, I joke, I mean, I do think the PR campaign perspective is important, but the reality is David was enmeshed in that family, and he did very much, I would not doubt that he would be reluctant to kill his secondary father figure. Like, I don't want to take that away. Both can be true at the same time. Yeah. But yes, I do thank you, Gary, for pulling that back up. There was a closer relationship. So, yeah.
I think your term enmeshed is probably the right term here. And that I mean, this is a prime example of the dis and dysfunctional. I mean, you can't, yeah, he's like a son to me, but I throw a spear at him when I want to, you know. I mean, okay.
Yeah.
Well, David was also.
Remember, God was behind a lot of Saul.
So it's all God's fault.
Yeah. So what were you gonna say? All right, let's flip over to the Psalms real quick. We have about 10 minutes. So this is not necessarily directly tied to the situation, but it's one that has a lot of some similar themes, as you can see. The interesting thing that the notes say is that this is an acrostic poem. So if you remember in elementary school when it would be like your name and you had to like have a sentence for each line of your name, that's what this poem is. And I didn't say what it is.
Is it an alphabetic acrostic?
It may be. I would need to look it up and do a little bit more research. There are some acrostic poems that do spell out words. A lot of them are ABCs. So if the sentences seem repetitious or disjointed, it's because it's a poetic function that each one of the lines is a different letter, that they're being creative with this. So anyways, with that, what are some of the things that you notice? Like, what are some of the features present in this poem?
I kind of feel like it kind of goes from here to there. And maybe that's part of the acrostic part. I mean, first, okay, I trust in you. And then, oh, make me know your paths. And then I'm in trouble, so be merciful. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the topics, when I was first reading this, I had a similar thought of like, this doesn't seem well organized topically, which is why I think it's important to remember it's an acrostic poem. So they're trying their best, but if it feels disjointed, it's probably because they were trying to make the letters work. So what are some of the favorite themes that you see, or some themes that are applicable?
Trust in God.
What happens to those that trust in God?
Well, I'm assuming they'll be forgiven. He's asking for forgiveness a lot in the beginning, for mercy.
I think he's very concerned about his enemies. That's mentioned a couple of times.
He wants to be forgotten for things that he did in his youth.
Pardon my guilt.
The word shame shows up early on a lot. But when you talk about shame, and it's in the Psalms, is there some root word that describes this sort of shame? I mean, at least I do, kind of like, that's a very harmful thing for a person to feel shame or to have that inflicted upon them. But is there something in the Hebrew that would?
So I would have to look up a little bit more with the word and tease out its roots. What I know is that the connotations of the word shame are different. So it means like, at least the connotation that I often get from the word shame is like, you emotionally feel horrible because you are worthless and you're no good and you should be better, like all of those negative, very abusive sounding things.
It's you are a bad person as opposed to you did something bad.
Right. Where when it's talked about, like they will use phrases like your mother's shame, which is talking about, well, specifically that phrase, it's like talking about nether regions, which you don't show people. And so we know from that connotation that your shame is kind of the things that it's more of like the things you keep private. It's the things you don't disclose. Now, granted, there's a certain bit where it's like, of course, you hide the things that you are ashamed of, the things that aren't, that are the things that do make you feel crummy and cruddy and icky inside. But there's also a sense that like there's just some things that other people don't need to know. Sometimes a phrase I think about in my own head is inside thoughts. Inside thoughts stay in the brain. Inside thoughts should not always become outside thoughts, because sometimes you think things that the world does not need to know. And that also is the shame, that it's not necessarily that I am a terrible person because I had this thought. It's just like, no one needs to know that. You don't need to know that. No. And so it's more of that like protective self that hides both the things that the world doesn't need to see. It hides your ugly bits, but it's more of a protective word.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Yeah. So there's a few features as we start looking at the Psalms that are very standard to the topics that psalmists tend to hit. And we see this one doesn't have the typical order because they're doing fancy things with the structure, but you can see these themes come out. One of them is most Psalms ask God for something. A lot of Psalms ask God to protect them from their enemies. There's a lot of talk of like, hey, my enemies are out to get me, protect me. And so there's that ask and there's that want. A lot of Psalms have a purpose that is semi-self-serving, like, help me out, I'm in a hard spot. That is often followed by the next bit of, God, you are good. Most Psalms have a praise section where they talk about how great God is, how merciful, how mighty. Think of all your good adjectives. They say all of those lovely things. And there's an assurance of belief that then often follows of like, help me out. God, you're really good. And because you're really good, I know you're going to help me. And so there's that assurance of like, okay, I know you're on my side. I've reminded myself that you are a good God. Therefore, you're going to be on my side. Glory to your household forevermore. And there's often a praise or blessing. So sometimes there's also additional parts of basically preaching to other people, which we see in here as well, of talking about, oh, those who fear the Lord's name, good things will happen to them. Fear the Lord, for good things will happen to you. So where do you see some of these those pieces that I talked about? Where do you see the focal points of some of these topics?
The one that surprised me here that you don't often see in the Psalm is turn to me. This is line 6, verse 16, line 16. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. You know, that's for an adult man to say, I'm lonely. Seems unusual. And then above that, my eyes are ever toward the Lord, for he will pluck my feet out of the net. I don't know where that comes from, where that image comes from.
Like a trap for a bird, isn't it?
Yeah, a bird or a rabbit. It's a hunting metaphor. So, like a common phrase, I don't know if it's in this one, is like, my enemies have snares out. Do not let me fall into the enemy snares. It's a trapping, like using nets or other things to kind of tangle up an animal. So that's the image of I'm snared in my enemy's plan. God, you're just gonna like, boop, pluck me out.
Okay.
You know, when I look at this, I don't quite see its connection to the story in a way. For example, it's not a picture of many foes, as in verse 19, and with I mean, there is violence, but it's only one, really, there's only one foe against him at this point. That violent hatred is really a pretty strong kind of hatred, isn't it? That's
Violent hatred, they hate me. Yeah.
wow. And I wonder if with a violent hatred, he doesn't hate others. But it's easier to say other people are. I mean, I can identify with that.
My life, do not let me be put to shame.
So I will say one of the reasons why I have very rarely preached on the Psalms. Like I said, I love poetry. This is not always my cup of tea. And the thing I personally have struggled with, Gretchen, that you're kind of putting a finger on, the Psalms are actually fairly violent. a lot of people say, oh, they're beautiful, they're comforting, and I'm like, they're so wishing God to do violence on other people. I don't know what to do with that.
Mhm.
While in our earlier discussion, we were talking about what does it mean to like have like the angry email and to delete it. This does not feel like the angry email is being deleted. This feels like you're calling on God to do the angry email on your behalf.
Mhm.
And there, like, while there's asking for mercy for oneself, there's not as much mercy shown to enemies. And so this is one thing that we'll see. I don't know what to do with it. It's not something that and I'm going to own up to the fact that this is why I don't often like the Psalms. It's because I don't know what to do with that kind of violent imagery of conquer my enemies, which is very present. And so we see some of that here.
But couldn't your enemies are not always human beings. They could be your own problems.
Mhm.
And so that is one take that has often been applied, is to spiritualize these, is to turn them into, well, powers and principalities. Sometimes our enemies are internal struggles. But when they're attributed to David, they seem very, like, that can be a way we can interpret them and understand them, but they do seem to be written with people who had enemies in mind. That there's a sense that they were written with specific groups and peoples in mind, and there is one, I forget what number it is, it literally talks about smashing babies against rocks. And I don't know what to do with that, because it is very gruesome and very much is talking about actual people. So that's where, like, Gary, yes, and that is one way to do it, but I think we do need to honor the fact that David had enemies. And when he's asking for things to be done, he has people in mind. And so that's kind of one of those, what do we do with it feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It almost seems as if the psalm is a very broad blanket of an appeal to God to do away with everything that's bothering me.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a problem? Like, what's the benefit and the downside of that? Of, okay, God, take away all my problems.
Yeah.
What's
Good idea.
what's helpful about that?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's helpful at all.
So what's harmful about asking God to take away all of your problems?
It kind of assumes that you're not responsible for
anything. Yeah.
No.
He's not saying, help me solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's not even saying he's sorry. He got himself into all this stuff.
No.
Yeah, accountability is not necessarily there.
Yeah, it's more fix it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get his feet in that net? That's what I'd like to. I'm
Kind of like
what a horrible feeling that would be for a bird, and what a horrible feeling would be for a person to be in a situation where they feel helpless.
Yeah. So I think there's a both and. Sometimes we find ourselves in positions we didn't ask to be a part of. Sometimes we do really, it would be so nice to have an advocate on our side and trust that someone above us has the answers. And then other times we need to take ownership that we put ourselves in this position and we have to solve our own we have to solve our problems, and there is not going to be a magic answer in the sky that just comes down. So I think that can be a both and.
By the way, it's Psalm 137, which starts out so beautifully with, by the waters of Babylon, we sat there and wept, and ends up with, dash the baby's heads against the rocks.
Yep.
But Boy, you've raised some interesting questions about the
Mhm.
Psalms.
Yeah, very.
All right. Well, with that in mind, we are over time. Thank you all for discussing. I'll try to give some more time for the Psalms. I know this was kind of our introduction to some of them. We'll pull out some of the features of some of the next ones later. So let us pray. Gracious and loving God, there are so many times where we need to make a snap decision and it is not always obvious what the good answer is. Sometimes we need to be loud and to advocate for things and be forward with where we are, to solve problems, to work together. And then other times, our first inclination is not the correct one. And so we ask that you hold our tongues when we are willing to lash out. We ask that you hold our emails and our letters when we type something that really should stay to ourselves. Help us understand when we should be merciful, when we should cut people slack, when we should not act. And then help us to know when we should stand up, when we should come forward, and when we should speak loudly. So guide us in all of these. For God, it is not easy to know which time is which, but be with us always. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
Take
you.
care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Everybody have a great week.
You
Thanks,
too.
Gary.
Thank you.